Hello, everybody. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something that I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is another way to say Carpe Diem. It's about going after the things that you want in life. What I wanted to do this year was rewatch the show Halt and Catch Fire, but this time talk about it with other people. And I've up-leveled that because I'm getting a chance to talk with people who actually worked on the show. So before we get into this interview today, which I'm so excited to do, a quick housekeeping item. If you're brand new to the show Halt and Catch Fire and you're looking for spoiler-free coverage up until the episode you're on, you're going to want to check out the episode recaps for that. Those are spoiler-free up until the one you're on in that sequence. These interviews are spoiler-filled. We can mention anything that happened in any episode of the show, especially for one like this, because today we are talking with Tom Wilson, who was the editor for 6 episodes in seasons 3 and 4. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to speak with you. I'm really enjoying talking with the editors on the show because you've made me look at the show in a different way. So it's going to be fun to dig into your episodes and see what comes of that. But before we do, how did you get connected with this show? How did this all start for you?
I got connected with this show in a very Hollywood way. I had a friend who worked on the second season, and as they were hiring for the third season, he said, "Hey, they need more editors over here. So why don't you come talk to these guys?" And that was Nathaniel Smith, whose name you may see pop up like the first credit at the end of every episode for the first few years. He worked with me on Mad Men and on Rome for HBO, and he found his way to a producing gig on Halt and Catch Fire and asked me to come in and take a look at things and talk to the guys. And then I happened to find out talking to Chris Rogers and Chris Cantwell that Chris Cantwell and I grew up down the street from one another and went to rival high schools. And so we just kind of hit it off right away. And it was a perfect fit.
Wow, a lot of connections there in the end. Um, you know, what kind of process do you, first of all, you come in for seasons 3 and 4. I should ask, how much did you know about the show? How much do you need to know about what's happened in the show before when you go in to start editing?
Sure. Well, on a job, you don't necessarily need to know what has happened before. Pretty much any job you go on to, they will want you to get caught up and find out, where the characters have started and where they've gotten to. But I just happen to have already been a fan of the show, not because I knew people that worked on it, but just I am a fan of good storytelling. And so, especially in season 2, as a fan, it really stood out to me that there was a sort of turn in the dramatic thrust of the show, that the women, Cameron and Donna, became much larger characters and really took on whole storylines of their own that were, frankly, I found more compelling than the Joe and Gordo storylines. It just really seemed like it was a story that was blossoming and was going to continue to. And I was very excited about where they could go. The Chris Rogers, Chris Cantwell, were just excited about the opportunity they had in front of them. AMC was always a big champion of this show. It was a small show, didn't have a whole lot of viewer numbers, wasn't made with a giant budget. It was really done on the cheap. But largely because AMC believed in the show and what these guys had created, and they really wanted them to play it out. So it would always be in the AMC library. And I think that has proven to be a very sage decision. They were always very supportive at AMC.
Oh, that's great to hear. When you started getting into your work on this show, maybe this is a more general question, what kind of process do you go through when you're going to edit an episode for this show?
Well, it's pretty much the same for any show, but it depends on what the content is in the episode. And this is a show that's very character driven. And so my biggest concerns were always breaking down sort of each character's arc. What am I looking to make sure and highlight? Sort of where am I going to want to make these little turns? Where in the scenes am I going to want to have a little hook that makes you kind of grab onto what a particular character is going through in a moment. So for this show, my big concern was, all right, what are my 4 arcs? My 4 main characters, what are they, where are they going? What are they doing? Where are they heading? And that was always the basis for this particular show. There are some shows that are more plot oriented, and you want to worry more about sort of hitting certain things for the audience to pick up on. But this being such a character driven show, my biggest concern was, all right, so what's Gordon's storyline in this one? What's Cameron's storyline in this one? How are they going to interact? And it's always really exciting when any of the characters get to have sort of a two-person interactive scene together, because they are all so talented. All four of our main actors, but everyone in this show, Toby Huss, Annabeth Gish, I mean, just some amazingly talented people who, frankly, made my job a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a number of times there, like, what are they doing in this episode? What are they doing right now? How much do you want to know? How much could you know about what was ahead? And how much are you building towards that in an edit?
On this show, because of our schedule and the way that the scripts were written, I mean, not the way, but the sort of timing of the writing of the scripts, I didn't always know where a season was going to go until I get into the back half of stuff. So it was a lot of just kind of finding, and this was something that the Chris's were always very supportive of, is just finding whatever you can in this character's experience and just kind of get it all out there in a scene, and we'll attenuate as we go through. The editorial process is a process, and so there's it's always a journey, it's always a discovery as you're going through things. So whether I knew where the larger story was going to go or not, it's always about how can I make this scene the most effective for this character. And half of that is usually stuff you just find in the footage, like little glances, little moments, little things that you can build. And this show was great. Again, having really talented actors that you can always cut to at any point, because they're always in the middle of a scene. They're always performing. There's always a reaction. There's always something telling about that character, because they really stay in character even when they're not the ones delivering lines. Really talented actors like that, again, they kind of make my job a little bit easier, which is part of what made this job so much fun to do.
Yeah. So you've done so many projects at this point. What stands out for you about this show compared to other shows that you've worked on?
You know what really stands out, and I tell people all the time, they ask me what's my favorite show, job, movie, anything that I've ever worked on, it's Halt and Catch Fire. And that is because of the Chris's, the guys at the top, that an attitude on a show, a feeling, a sense of calm or panic, it starts at the top, and everybody reacts to that, and they send that energy back out again, and it just when the guys at the top are calm and friendly and it just taking everything in stride and supportive and encouraging, it makes a big difference. It means everybody else on the project behaves that way as well. And when the person at the top is a chaotic mess, the show is a chaotic mess. And those guys are they're such wonderful people that I had such a great time working with them. And you feel it when you're on a project like that. It really does roll downhill, but in a good way.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And this is a consistent impression that I'm getting of working on this show, that it came from the top down. Absolutely. Well, let's get into some of the specific episodes and scenes that you worked on.
Sure.
And I'm happy to really address like any scenes that jump out to you as well, but I'll mention some specific ones. So if we look at the first episode, so episode 303, which is flipping the switch, we're getting a lot of Ryan and Joe this season. Obviously, this is a new pairing. It's a relatively fresh pairing at this point in the season as well. I'm always intrigued by those scenes with those two characters because they make me feel very off balance. I think something about the combination of those two characters and the energy that they're bringing. We're getting a lot of like extreme close-ups, especially with Ryan in those early days. We're getting a lot of unusual angles and strange framing of, like a lot of scenes that feel like they have a ton of movement where they actually haven't gone anywhere. So I've really been picking that up on a deep dive. And I'm curious, like, what kind of things were you able to do in an edit that maybe would make a viewer feel a little bit more off balance as these two characters are getting to know each other?
Well, in those scenes, that's pretty easy because it's Joe. Yeah, the things that Lee Pace are doing, where it's so hard to figure out really what's going on behind his eyes, but you can tell a lot is going on. And so it would be a lot of putting Ryan into a situation and then just letting him stew and letting him sort of, just wither under Joe's gaze. And we'd cut back to just, Lee Pace just kind of staring and it's a very Kuleshov effect thing going on where, the viewer is putting so much on that glance and just imagining what Ryan must be feeling, withering under Joe, because it also helps that Lee is so tall. He just kind of looms over everybody. And that really worked so well for that character that he could just kind of put Ryan in a situation, and then it was almost like a lab experiment, and you're waiting to see how it comes out, because Ryan is full of all this talent and potential, but scruples, it's hard to tell, like he seems like he's willing to sort of blur the line a little bit, but he knows what's right and what's wrong. But it's how far will his ambition drive him? And I think Joe is very much just sort of playing that out, sort of saying, I'm going to put you in this situation, I'm going to see how you react, I'm going to see if you earn the kind of mentorship that I want to give. I think Joe really wants to share. And you find out in later seasons that he really wants to have a child. He wants to be a dad. And I think that instinct is kind of playing out with Ryan a little bit. Like he wants someone that he can nurture and bring along, but Ryan has to prove his mettle. And that's tough because Joe is really going to put him through the fire. And so cutting scenes like that, it became really easy to just let moments sit, just making sure that the audience feels Joe's withering gaze as much as Ryan does. And then stylistically, our cinematographer on that show was so good at setting up sort of odd canted angles and sort of negative space in a frame. We had some directors who are specifically really, really talented at that regard. Michael Morris, who did a couple of the episodes I worked on, is just so talented at finding a way to make a frame feel a little off balance and just kind of put you a little on edge and yet still pull you into that character's eyes and their experience. And I think that the cinematography in general of this show is very good at making things feel not quite comfortable and in a subtle way. So yeah, cutting those things together, definitely just, it was a lot of letting uncomfortable moments linger.
Do you have a sense of like how far you can take an audience in that direction before you lose them? And I'm sure it's different across different genres, but for drama, how do you know how far you can take the audience?
It is, and that's part of the process, frankly, is you want to start out with things that just feel normal, like you want to just have a natural flow to things, but then you want to find and highlight the spots where you need to create either more speed or less speed, or how do you attenuate those moments? And a lot of that is just part of the process. You're not going to do it in your first pass. You want to sort of build the scaffolding of the story first, and then you can start filling it out and find where you need to play things. But a lot of that is just part of the process, just finding out, if I try this here, what am I going to get? If I try this out over here, what am I going to get? It's all very small changes, but the accumulation of them affect the impression that the viewer gets and how they feel about things.
If we look at your next episode, so 306, and she was, there are a couple things that I really want to look at here. One, there's this montage we get. It's so good. It's more Ryan and Joe stuff, but more of this is a question about montage in general. This one is set to a song, Jockey Full of Bourbon by Tom Waits. We're going to get the point, I think, of this montage is that we're going to see Ryan being mentored by Joe and Ryan sort of growing within that. And there's so many different little shots, just moments that they must have gotten footage from all these different locations and all these different setups. How do you work on a montage like this? Like, there's a lot of pieces to put together. You probably had a lot of raw materials to work with.
Yeah, there are, and they go through and they shoot full designed scenes, and you have to kind of pick out the pieces and put something together. I like to go when I have something of that nature, I like to just sit down and go through my footage and just look for any bit of the footage that's 1 or 2 seconds long that just on its own just feels compelling. And it doesn't have to feel compelling for any particular reason. I just want to find little visual elements that feel like they're interesting, that if I saw that for a second, it would make me want to know more about that. And so once I've collected all of those, then I can start putting them together, pacing it out to the song. And this is a case where I'm pretty certain that song was written into the script, that they decided ahead of time, we want this song to be here. And so that always makes things easier when the song is planned ahead of time and it works really well. So I don't have to spend a lot of time trying out different things and trying to find something that has the right rhythm or the right feel to it. It was I already knew what I was working against, and I knew that I just needed to find bits and pieces that would help lay stuff out, like the laying of the cable is indicative of the larger growth of the internet itself. And there are little things that that the viewer can kind of pick up on and read into, and those are the little bits you're looking for, and that you want to place them in a way so that rhythmically they're coming in at the right moment. And I'm really happy with how that one came out.
Yeah, it's an interesting juxtaposition because you get all the stuff where Ryan's being like moving real fast trying to get everything done and Joe's watching him, but then you get this like refrain of the unspooling of the cable, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
meditative. You're like, I
Yes.
don't know if I'm supposed to be like moving forward like Ryan or sitting here in a trance, because it's just like that interesting combination.
Yeah, like what of it is Ryan's frenetic panic, and what of it is Zen Master Joe trying to find his bliss in all the chaos. It's a lot of fun, and again, this is an episode that was directed by Michael Morris, who's so good at designing a frame that is off kilter and yet draws you in. And this montage has several shots where uh, things are in the frame in odd positions. I think one of the final shots is just kind of like their heads floating down at the bottom of the frame, and there's very little else in there except a ceiling. But you can kind of tell that amidst all this stuff, these two guys are there together, and it's an odd frame, and yet it still makes you feel like you're living the experience of these characters. So Michael Morris is a director I really enjoy working with, and he's just so good at camera blocking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about Cam and Gordon playing Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah.
I think this is a beloved sequence for a lot of people.
Oh yes.
Definitely a lot of like, I don't know, gifs, whatever of all of this. What happens in the edit to bring this to life, especially when it's going to be sort of snippets of scenes across the episode?
Right. Yeah. Well, this is a thing that comes into something that I think often gets overlooked in the editorial process, and that's licensing. That in order to get permission to use something like clips of Super Mario Brothers, it has to be very carefully researched ahead of time. We are given very specific clips of the game, and that's all we're allowed to use. So they had to kind of figure that out ahead of time, sort of work the script around to make sure that those pieces were going to be things that were represented in the dialogue. But then the actors never see these clips. They're just sitting in front of a green screen, just a blank television, and they're being told, okay, now this will be the moment where your character will find this, and you have to be excited about that. So they perform it based on the script that was based on the clips we were able to license, and then in the cutting room we have to go through and find bits of the footage that match up with what they're talking about. And sometimes it's very specific moments in the game, and sometimes it's just kind of random moments. It's just them saying, "Oh, how come you're always so good at the water level?" or something like that. And we have a clip of water level, so we have to try to find a bit of that kind of feels like it fits what they're talking about, and then cut that and then use visual effects to put that into the television. Which, by the way, I feel like the final version of that looks beautiful. I was just watching it the other day, and I had to call my assistant up and say, "We did that with green screen, right? Because I don't. It looks so clean. It looks like they're playing the game, but it was all green screen." And yeah, so that's a fun sequence to do. And then we also get to in the cutting room lay in all the sound effects and the music from the game, because all of that is untied to everything we're working with. So there was, a lot of like, okay, every time we see him jump, we got to add in the sound of him jumping. Every time he hits that hits that block, we got to add in the sound. And it really was a build from the ground up, even though we had certainly a template of the real game, but it's still something that gets painstakingly put together in the editing process.
Real reverse engineering of a life experience, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. It helps that that game came out when I was 10,
Yeah,
I played
yeah,
it obsessively.
yeah.
So it's certainly that's another thing I love about this game is I was at an age about between Gordon's two daughters. So, and the stuff they have on their walls, and they might be Giants posters. I had all that stuff. I had a lot of the toys that you see around. So it was very nostalgic working on this project.
Yeah, yeah. Um, if we look at episode 309, which
Uh,
was Nim, I mean, how do you pick what scenes to talk about here? Look, you edited a Comdex episode. I'm just so
uh-huh.
excited to talk with you about this. First of all, I have to ask about Valoria.
Yeah.
What a complicated dance scene, actually. I mean, I think the one of the reasons that I love it so much is that the camera is moving around, like Joe and Cam are dancing, but then like the camera's dancing with them, which
Mhm.
must have made it hard to edit this scene. Uh,
Yes.
how do
Yeah.
you, what were you
Yeah.
working with here, and how did you go about this one?
Okay. Well, to begin with, that episode was directed by Chris Cantwell, one of the show's creators, and he just did a beautiful, masterful job. And that scene in particular, they knew they wanted Valoria again, going in already knowing what they were going to be playing against and dancing to. They had it playing while they were dancing around. There's even a point where Cameron is mouthing the words of the song because that was really happening. So that's always very useful. Makes my job a lot easier. And the camera was moving around a lot. We had a handful of takes. The takes are hard to match because everybody's moving around, the camera's moving around. So a lot of it is played in just a couple of takes because the camera work was so exquisite that we were able to stay in it and stay with them for a long time and just kind of very carefully pick the handful of cuts that are in that sequence. But a lot of it was just excellent execution on set and being able to play it out. I think there were only 3 or 4 cuts in that whole sequence. And part of it is just it's a challenge that your material doesn't necessarily cut together because it's all so each shot you have is so involved. But that sequence itself, and then everybody coming in and Donna showing up, and it's there's a lot going on and there's a lot happening, and there are moments you really want to let linger. That whole episode was an exercise of how do we pace this out different than a normal television show. And I have to say it's my favorite episode that I worked on throughout the run. I think it's an absolutely beautiful episode. I'm so glad. Not that AMC was difficult at all. AMC was always great, but there were certainly notes of maybe you want to pace this up, maybe this should be faster. This doesn't quite feel like a normal show, and it was very important to Chris Cantwell that we let things breathe in that episode. So I'm very proud of how we were able to do that and get away with it kind of. I mean, not that there was not that we really got away with anything, but it is a slower paced episode than most things you see on television. And I think it's really important. And it's also there's so much happening in that episode that is the culmination of everything that's been in the series up to that point. And it all exists in those quiet moments. One of my favorite scenes is Cam and Joe speaking up on the top level when they first play the NIM game and that scene and working on that scene was a lot as well because we have just cutaways of the ground and the lighters that they're playing the game with, and we had several different versions of when they would make their moves and when we were cutting down to the game and interjecting those little beats in the course of the conversation, or which bits of dialogue we were kind of moving around, and they should say this chunk earlier and then this chunk coming later will have more power to it. And And we did a lot of little split screens to kind of have people's heads turn or look down or arms move so we could control during that entire time when they're making their moves and playing the game, and how the physicality of that game could inform the impact of their conversation. And also just where we were able to create long, slow moments where you're just living with one of these amazing actors and watching them react to absorbing this information that has been a buildup since the beginning of their story. And that scene in particular, I'm incredibly proud of. But that whole episode, I think, is just it was everything coming together the right way at the right time.
It's such a celebratory episode. I mean, people loved that episode, and I don't know at what point this started to happen, but I was actually recently covering 401, which will tell people about how far ahead I am in these interviews right now. But it occurred to me watching how the season opener for season 4 started that at some point, AMC was not concerned with trying to get new people to understand what was happening in the show. You know, like I look at the opener of season 4 and I'm like, wow, if this is your first time watching, good luck. You know, like try to figure out what these time jumps are doing, right? And I think, you know, that episode too, you've got a time jump, you're putting pieces, like we're detectives figuring out what's happening in 309. And so it's just amazing to me, like what you're saying as well, where it's like, no, you just want to sit with these people, and we're not giving exposition every 5 seconds to say, hey, remember that time when, you know, like it's just you're just sitting with these people that you're assuming the audience has been watching for years, or at least 3 seasons.
Yes, and the beginning of episode or season 4 is a great example of where AMC just said, look, you guys, you want to make one more season, we're going to let you do it. Go do pretty much anything you want. You know, we support you. And that's something that is really rare. It's hard to find a studio or network that is willing to just kind of say, whatever you want to try to do, we support it. And that's yeah, it's just a very special thing.
Yeah. Going back to 309, I mean, there's so much good Cam and Joe stuff here, but there's a scene, it's sort of a it's more than one scene happening all at the same time where Cam and Joe are having an affair.
Yeah.
But it's sort of crossed between they're on the roof talking about ending their night, or you know what their night looks like, and then they're starting to hook up, probably in Cam's room, I'm guessing. For me, watching this, it reminded me a little bit of the experience of watching, there was a Nicholas Roeg film, Don't Look Now, where there was a lot of sort of blending of time happening around a really graphic love scene. So, like, when you're working on something like this, what goes into this from an editing standpoint?
Sure. Well, this particular situation, they were written as 2 separate scenes, coming back to back. And what we found was, putting together as part of the process, that back to back, it really felt like, it almost felt tawdry, that it was, okay, they've connected up on the roof and now they've just decided to go have an affair. And the idea in terms of how Chris and Chris wanted the audience to experience what these characters were going through was that these are 2 souls that are connected, that they have to have this connection, and it is kind of a goodbye, and it's a bittersweet thing, but it's not designed to be passion. It's not designed to be infidelity. It's designed to just be this connection of these 2 souls that just are meant to cross paths. And so being able to kind of intercut between that emotional, very vulnerable conversation at the top, I mean, sorry, up on the roof, and then inside to the bedroom, it lent it the impression, the feeling that we were looking for, in a way that it didn't when it was just displayed as a nice scene between 2 characters on the roof and then a sex scene. And also too, when you put the sex scene into its own space as its own individual scene, well, then you have to put music to it, you know, and then it feels like just a cliche sex scene. But if you're able to keep it dry and let the dialogue and just the deep soul searching connection between these two people be kind of like what the music is to their love scene, it takes on a whole different meaning. It just doesn't feel tawdry. It feels purposeful, and it feels like it's a part of the journeys for each of these characters. So
Mm,
that was definitely something we found in the process, and I love
so
how it came
cool.
out. Yeah.
I mean, it's there's a lot to explore in it, and I love hearing what was happening behind the scenes when you were working on it in that process. Um, well, let's talk a little bit more about Gordon. So we've got 403 miscellaneous. So there's we get Gordon and Joe calling Haley to the office.
Hmm.
They want to buy Comet. This series, you know, we think of it as a drama, but there's so much comedy in this,
So
and
much.
that whole sequence with wanting to buy Comet, I feel like everybody was just on like at their A game. That the writing, everything about it. um so when you're working on something like this, we get a lot of really specific choices around when we're looking at each character, when we're getting reactions, when we're seeing Gordon and Joe outside, when we're looking at Haley watching them.
Hmm.
You know, how do you work on something like this knowing that comedic timing is going to be a factor?
Yeah, well, it is certainly part of the process of trying out certain things and kind of getting a feeling for what's working and where things are going. But there were also some very specific things of we know the relationship between Joe and Gordon now, and we know how that's going to play out, and we know where Joe is going to be able to kind of catch Gordon off guard, and where he's going to be able to needle him, and where Gordon is going to push back. So their conversation was that one was pretty easy to figure out. And then the other aspect there is where do we start shifting the point of view of the show into another character and into Haley's point of view? Where how do we bring her up and make her a sort of a new main character as much as we can and turn this into her POV? And that was a lot of fun. And I mean, the kids in the hall stuff with squishing their heads was just kind of so perfect for a teenager at that time. And because I would have been doing the same thing, honestly. And it was, you know, you want to give enough to make it funny, and you want to give enough to kind of show that she can see the interaction between these two. And I think part of her draw to Joe is also like this is someone that my dad respects and also someone who can kind of stand up to my dad, and that I think for a kid that's sort of a big deal. Like this adult is cool, and being able to just have that observational viewpoint of through the glass where you can't really hear them. I think is really nice. It just it's another little extra thing. It's a sort of a sonic touch to help put us into her experience. And she was great. And it was that was so much fun. I think we had some more jokes that we ended up not using because there's just so much great material. I mean, you know, Scoot is hilarious and always gives you great ad libs, and Lee can just kind of roll with anybody. So it's you know, it's a process of just finding the right bits and making sure it's all there in a way that is really satisfying.
Yeah, even just thinking about that scene is making me laugh. So I'm trying not to be like goofy this whole time. It's such a good, but I love that you're pointing out that it really puts us in Haley's point of view, because you're right. We do have to make that shift. Her very first episode, she's just like sitting on a couch. Cam says hi, she squeaks and runs away, and we have to
Hmm.
get from there to some really meaty storylines with Haley. And so it's one of the things that I think is so amazing about this show, that stands out to me as different from other shows, that I haven't seen a lot of adult shows where the kids have really solid stories, and especially not the younger kid. Um, so this is like a novelty for me in the shows that I've watched. So it's fun to see that this scene did so much of that heavy lifting of getting into her point of view.
Yeah, and it's a really great use of just the intergenerational sort of shift that's going on culturally at the time too. That this world, this aspect of society that her parents have been so instrumental in sort of helping bring about. And now she's in the middle of it, and she's in the driver's seat. You know, she's able to get on the internet and figure out a new way to approach the World Wide Web, and it's also really cool. It's another great aspect of how the Chris's were telling this story, the way that they brought things along, they let things evolve, and it's always so much fun.
Mm-hmm. You know, another scene that really doesn't look like anything else in this show, 406, a connection is made. We're going to get Haley, Cam, Joe, Gordon, and Katie, and they're in a park, and they're going to fire off rockets for Haley's birthday to the song Seven Seas by Echo and the Bunnymen. It's youthful, it's celebratory, it's outside, it's, you know, it's just different. It just looks
Right.
unlike the other stuff we've seen. Tell me about working on this one.
Well, that one, the thing I remember most from that was the rockets didn't work. So so they were having the hardest time getting these things to launch at all. That when you actually do see all of the rockets launch, that's actually 2 or 3 different takes, and we've just kind of used visual effects to stitch a frame together so it looks like they're all shooting up at once. That they you know, just had a lot of technical issues. That's my biggest memory from this. And the director calling me going, I'm not sure we got everything, but we can't get them to launch again. So, you know, you got to look at the footage right away and let me know if we have a problem. Michael Morris, again, who directed episode 306, did this one as well. Yeah, you know, he was very excited. But we cobbled things together. We had little extra snippets of footage. There's a visual effect shot to make it look like Gordon's rocket actually goes straight up in the air, even though we didn't really have that footage. We created everything we could to make that happen. But you know, that's another thing that I did as a kid, and so I had so much fun, you know, playing that out and letting that happen. It was important to me to watch them run after and try to catch their rockets, because that was always such a big part of the experience when I was a kid. Is you launch it up, and that's one thing, it's cool, but you try to run and catch it before it hits the ground. And so my biggest memory of that whole thing was, yeah, the rockets didn't work, and we had to figure out how to make it look like they did.
Oh my gosh, I love doing these interviews so much. That just adds something totally new to watch. And that scene that Gordon's didn't even fire properly.
Yeah,
Yeah, when they say like, "Oh, we'll fix it in post,"
that is a very true maxim.
it seemed like a good idea at the time to write in
Uh,
a firing off the rocket scene, but oof. Um, so great.
mm,
409 search is a
yeah,
really important episode. I mean, it'd be hard to find one that's not important at this point in the show, but you know, I wanted to talk a little bit about Boz because we haven't really addressed that character much here, but we're going to get a scene in 409 where Boz is going to bring his old Cardiff transistor
hmm,
radio to Donna to repair it. And we're going to get this whole, it's really sort of just like a, how can I have a conversation with Donna? And this is the reason that he offers for it. And, you know, that part of Donna that's still thinking about fixing speaking spells, I guess, from season
right,
1 is on the case and she's working
yeah,
on it, but he's trying to have a serious conversation with her at the same time. So there's a lot of tactile stuff happening, but there's a lot of intention with the conversation. And this is also not a pairing we see a ton of.
hmm,
So I'm wondering, you know, when you're editing something like this, first of all, I guess I'm wondering when you're editing something like this, where you don't often see that pairing, do you approach it differently than if it's a pairing that we've often seen? This feels special. So how do you honor something like that?
well, first of all, I just want to call out the genius writing aspect of making it a Cardiff transistor radio, and just tying all of that history of the show back into this one scene in such a just simple but effective way. It's just you know, it's a great piece of writing, and Toby Huss is just incredibly talented. It just Boz is my favorite character. I just love everything that Toby does with the character. And frankly, I don't think I ever really approached the fact that he was in the scene with Donna any differently, because Boz has that same kind of energy about him no matter who he's dealing with. I feel like it, or at least in the last couple of seasons, where he just becomes sort of professor emeritus for everybody, and that just the way that he's able to help characters, and he does it with Joe, I think in the same episode, in the garage, where he's able to sort of give the other character what they need to kind of figure out their own problems. And I think that that scene is a perfect example of he manages to indirectly give Donna everything she needs to figure out her own problem. And part of that is tapping into where she started. You know, she can fix little machinery, she can handle small problems, and it's something she loves to do. And you know, reconnect her with what makes her uh, go in a way, because she's kind of stalled out at this point, and you know, she's using Gordon's death as an excuse to kind of hide. And Boz is really good at yeah, just helping people get out of their own way. And I love the way that they wrote that character. I love how Toby does that. He just has this sort of paternal sort of like a scene with Boz is just sort of like a hug. And I love that. And I love the character. I love what Toby does with it. I love the way they write him. I love I don't know if it's the opening scene, but it's early on in that episode where he gets the good news from the doctor. And that is so fun. I had so much fun working on that. When he walks outside, there's, you know, they shoot that and they shoot it in slow motion, but it's at one speed. So, and once I'm laying it into the song, throughout that, the speed of that shot is kind of going up and down. You know, it's a half speed, it's a three-quarter speed. It's, you know, it's going up and down to make sure that I'm hitting all the notes in the song that I want to hit and hitting the right moments. And I just love that moment of him just kind of slowly walking out to this astronaut music, and he's just, it's a whole new lease on life, and that's something I look back fondly on.
And again with the pacing on that, because he's just come out of this, he's in the doctor's office, he's saying all this funny stuff, so it's really comedic, but it's because he's nervous, so you feel the drama and the tension of like, is this man going to be okay? And then there's just this like release.
Yeah, and it's just this glorious music, and it's funny, but at the same time it's very endearing. And yeah, I love it. I love that moment so much.
Oh, so there's a scene in this episode that it either works or it doesn't, right? Like it has to work. There's this long tense scene with Cam and Joe. Starts as a fight, then they have some joy, and then it ends in disappointment. And somewhere in the middle, we are going to find that Yahoo is going to be the search directory on Netscape, and everything that they've been doing is going to amount to absolutely nothing. It feels like the end of an era, this scene. And there are some very specific choices of how to shoot the reveal of Yahoo. So how do you approach something like this? There's a lot in this scene. Probably pacing is another factor here too. What do you do to make this scene work?
Well, it is again, it is about pacing, and you want to feel the tension in there, and then you really want to you want to have that moment where the audience can catch up to the fact that everything that they've been working towards just collapsed. And how do you let that land in a way that doesn't feel bombastic but feels genuine, uh, and also powerful. I mean, you want people to feel like they've just been kind of punched in the gut, sort of like how Joe feels at that moment. I'm not sure if Cameron is happy or not. Honestly, she's such an enigmatic character, and never really knew like how much she really wanted any kind of success. But definitely for Joe, I mean, he's put everything into this, and that moment of discovering, oh no, Netscape they're the default. Like everything that I've been trying to do, it's all just gone. And that is It is a lot in the pacing and sort of how do you make things moved until you want your audience to take a breath, and that's really important, and also too building that conflict between the characters so that sort of becomes the focus of the scene, that's what people are really paying attention to, so that the reveal of Yahoo just suddenly it takes the breath out of the viewers as well as the characters. It's a matter of just sort of finding the right attenuation of the pacing and the shots to get us there.
It's effective. And I as I think about it, it's very much sort of the reverse of how we've been accustomed to seeing things happen in this series, where the characters have an idea and we're half a step behind them, and they're revealing those ideas to us. Often Joe is the one revealing ideas to us throughout the show. It's like, oh, I've got an idea, and we're sitting there going, what's the idea? But in this case, we actually are a half step ahead of them, because we've seen, oh gosh, when is it going to hit them that this is
Yeah.
not happening, because we know it's, we have the advanced information. It's really feels like one of the first times we've kind of had that lead time on
hmm
them, and to have it at the end of the series is, I think, a big choice.
Yeah, and again, great writing, great decision to do that it's not just a glorious, triumph, but also to use all the things throughout the season, to use Cameron's connection to Alexa, that to get this special version of the software that she's not supposed to have, that all these little things that we can, and the conflict between the characters, all these little things that we can give the audience to really sort of grab onto, to hopefully kind of momentarily forget, oh yeah, this isn't going to work out for them, and so that when it hits, you can really feel it.
Mm. If you think about all of the episodes that you worked on, what was the most complex one for you in total?
They all have their challenges. I think in many ways, 309, Nem was complex for a lot of different reasons, but also 409 Search is we had to independently build a commercial for the company. And that is in and of itself kind of its own process. You have to, find clips and pieces and go out and shoot bits of footage of people reacting to things and find stock shots that will play into something. And that was a thing where we had to, it was kind of like we were making two projects at once. We were working on the episode as a whole, but we also had to make a commercial. And I know the commercial doesn't seem like a big thing. It's sort of early on in the episode. It seems kind of small, but those kinds of things actually take a lot of time and effort, and it's time and effort that's always really in short supply when you're on any show. And that, so in a lot of ways, that became sort of the most complicated episode we had to work on. But the Super Mario stuff was complicated. Certain other things are complicated. And then yeah, the Comdex episode was complicated because we wanted to give it space and air in places that are uncommon on a TV show. So that in and of itself was kind of complicated to do something different.
Are there any other scenes that you really were just like wanting to talk about here that we didn't address?
Oh man, gosh, there's a lot. I mean, I love the stuff with Gordon in the closet and the ham radio. The final scene of that episode where Cameron has set up her own ham radio and the two of them are talking, and she reveals that she got married, and he says, "Hey, I'm really happy for you," and she's just kind of sitting there by herself in this room that has no other furniture anywhere. And yeah, thanks, I'm happy too. And it's just oh yeah, exactly. Like, it's just
Gosh,
it's so powerful, and it's just such like
Cam
wonderful,
is like a walking
beautiful.
coping mechanism.
Oh, I
It's
know.
like you get to that point in the series, like, oh, this poor woman.
Oh, and her character is just not equipped to, did not grow up with the tools to handle all the stuff that's happening to her throughout the course of the show, and so she's just a walking open wound, and it just the interactions between her and other people. I love all of the Cameron Gordon stuff. I always find it very touching. I love anything with Boz and another character. I actually really love the stuff with Diane and Boz. But that was a lot of fun. And when the first scene I had between the two of them, when Boz tears up the offer to buy another company and they're walking outside and she's kind of impressed with him, at that point I did not know that they had a romantic thing coming. That I thought it was all business because I had not seen where that relationship was going to go. I hadn't found out yet. And I remember specifically Chris Rogers coming in and sitting down and looking at that and going, I don't know, could it be a little more flirty? This feels a little too businesslike, and you know, and it worked out perfect. The little looks and smiles that they put in there, they're not overt, but it's there, and you can see the impression being made on each of them, and seeing where that relationship went. I just think it's a beautiful relationship. These two people finding each other later in life and sort of discovering, not even discovering, they come to each other at a point where they know what's important, and they know why it's important, and they know that they don't have time to waste on frivolity. And that's I think just a wonderful relationship. So and Annabeth Gish is so talented. So I loved working on scenes with them.
I love Diane. That couple being in the show, I think, is a good bar to measure every other relationship against. Because when you see people in their best or worst moments, it's like, yeah, but this is what stable looks like.
Exactly.
So good.
I mean,
Well,
their final scene when he's cleaning the garage and they just kind of, like they dance and the camera's pulling away. It's just, I just love it. I love that relationship. I always loved working on their scenes.
yeah. Well, I know it's a strange time for your industry, but is there anything that you're working on that you can share with us, or is there something that you've done relatively recently that we should know about?
Well, let's see. I just am wrapping up a project right now that's about to air on Peacock in September. It's called Fight Night. It stars Kevin Hart and Don Cheadle and Samuel L. Jackson. It's based on a true story of something that happened in Atlanta in 1970. That kind of kicks off with a Muhammad Ali fight. So it's we've got boxing, we've got mobsters, we've got all kinds of stuff happening. It's a wild show. It's called Fight Night, and it's coming out very soon. I hope everybody checks that out. And a couple of years ago, I mean, other jobs since then, but one thing that has always been really special to me and close to my heart is a show called Candy that is on Hulu. It stars Jessica Biel and Melanie Linsky, and it's based on a true story of a horrible axe murder that happened one between two women in 1980 in Texas, and it actually happened 10 miles from where I grew up when I was a kid. And I was able to make that show along with some alumnus from Mad Men, that the Matt Weiner's writer's assistant for the pilot of Mad Men was making her own show. Like, she had worked up and had her own show. She was the showrunner, creator, and that's Candy, and it's on Hulu, and we made it a couple of years ago. I think it's excellent. I really love it, and I'm very proud of it. So I hope everybody checks that out as well. And there's more to come. There's things are starting to ramp back up in Hollywood. So there will be, especially next year, there's going to be a lot of new product coming along.
Well, that's good to hear. It's so interesting for Candy. It's so interesting to have an opportunity. It seems kind of a little bit lucky, and obviously a lot of good networking and hard work, but to be able to work on a project that has that personal resonance for you, I'm sure that doesn't come around very often. So
True.
it's amazing.
Yeah. It doesn't, and a lot of luck is a big component in any career, any successful career. I wouldn't say it's all just skill and hard work. There's always a lot of luck involved, but I'm very proud of that one. I'm very proud of Fight Night. I hope everybody enjoys it. It's a lot of fun, and there's always something more coming.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk about Halt and Catch Fire, and for sharing all of these fun behind the scenes details with us.
Oh, my pleasure, Melissa. Thank you so much for focusing on this show. This is I think it's a show that's really amazing, and I want it to not disappear into the annals of time. And I'm really glad that you're doing this. And I hope everybody is enjoying rewatches or first time watches, and enjoying all the discussion that can be had in this, because there is so much that goes on in the subtext of this show, and it's really delicious, and it's a lot of fun to talk about and think about, and there's a lot you can get out of it. So I'm really glad you're doing this. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for that. And to everybody who's watching this, please go out there, like Tom just said, and watch Halt and Catch Fire. Bye, everybody.
Bye.